Who was the worst person you've ever played D&D with? Tell us in the comments below. The worst DM I had was one who would minimize all our choices because he had written everything that would happen in the campaign beforehand. So, even if we were sticking to the objectives, we could never choose how to handle things. The only thing we would do was roll dice in combat. Now, the worst player I actually had was a group of players. I almost gave up on DMing because of them. In the group of 5 players, they never said thank you or anything for the session, and I ran like 30 sessions with them, covering all the costs myself, never charged a penny. Not even at the end of the campaign, but that was okay. The thing that bothered me a lot was that 3 of them would constantly force you on for fun whenever I was reading a text block or narrating anything that took more than 30 seconds. Sometimes they would just talk over me to stop me, and on a few occasions, one of the players would start saying blah 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 blah, let's play, while I was describing something. Now, of course, I understood that I was terrible and boring at DMing, so for the rest of the adventure, I kept myself to a minimum and invested a lot of time before sessions on improving my speech in an effort to be less boring. Thing is, in the end, one of the players came to me and said I was the best DM she ever had, and that she was really sorry about the behavior of her fellow players. By that time, I had already decided that I would never DM again. She asked me to DM a one-shot for her and her friends. I did, changing nothing in my style, and everybody liked it. I kept DMing and never had an issue like that again with any other group. So, for me, the worst players were the ones who almost made me give up because they were kind of thankless, I guess. Context. The group is about 15 minutes into session 1. The party is at level 1, and we've chased a shady figure into an alleyway. The alleyway reaches a dead end. The hooded figure turns to face you and pulls out a scalpel. Roll initiative. All right, first combat of the campaign, let's go. I'm gonna stab him with my rapier. Does a 12 hit? You miss. Sorcerer? Firebolt. Does a 14 hit? You also miss. Rogue? I want to throw a dagger at him. 13, so I guess I missed too. Yep. Fighter? I'm going to hit him with my longsword. Does a 17 hit? Nope. You just can't seem to land a hit on this guy. He's going to strike at Fighter with his scalpel. Does a 19 hit? Yeah. Okay, you take 25 slashing damage. Guys, I'm dead. You mean unconscious? No, I mean dead. My hit point max was 12. The shadowy figure will now spend a bonus action to use his skitter ability to slip past the rest of you without provoking opportunity attacks. He runs out of the alleyway and disappears around a corner. Aren't you going to, follow him? All right, I guess. But we're going to stay as far away as we can without losing sight of him. You follow the shadowy figure to a creepy old building with boarded up windows. He goes inside and closes the door behind him. Do you follow? We had this guy cornered at the end of an alleyway, only to whiff an entire round of attacks against him and watch him insta-kill Fighter with a scalpel. Following him into a strange location where he might have buddies to help him seems like a terrible idea. All right, I guess we can stop playing then. From experience, 3.5 edition. A friend of a family friend was DMing. He spent 4 hours with us going over what would now be considered Session 0 and character building. He said he would see us in a couple of weeks while he got things prepped. We didn't hear from him for like a month. We randomly ran into him at a mall one day and asked how things were going and when we would start. His response? I started 3 weeks ago with a better group I found. Then he walked away. It killed all my interest in D&D for years. 4th edition. After playing in the Neverwinter Games Day event, which got me back into D&D, and the Neverwinter Encounters with a pair of good DMs, I went to another gaming store for the Feywild Encounters module on Wednesdays, since the store I originally played at had me DMing it on Fridays. I didn't touch the module book until after playing it as a player to avoid ruining the experience. Whether I had read it or not, the Wednesday DM made it such a negative experience for everyone every week. They would punish good rolls, punishing interaction with the environment, and gloating to the store owner about his goal every session was to TPK the party as fast as possible. I first fell in love with D&D about 6 years ago. A good friend of mine brought me and some other mutual friends together, and we had a blast. The pandemic hit, we switched to online, some players left, and a few new ones joined, friends of the DM's partner at the time. One of them, let's call her Jill, played a barbarian orc librarian who attacked with a comically massive dildo. Kind of a silly on paper, which I commented on, but she took herself and her roleplay way too seriously. She played her character as depressive and traumatized, and the sort of lawful good character who was dismissive and holier than thou toward the rest of our characters, which was a massive contrast to the carefree murder hobo adventure we had previously been on. Jill came into conflict with a few of us. Our DM bent over backwards to appease her, removing a lot of combat and dungeons in favor of mostly roleplay, to the point that he was frustrated by all the cuts. Jill also inexplicitly hated the DM's sister, another player who was so pushy about the game's tone that the DM's sister changed her character, who was more comical, to bring in a new, more serious one. That all pales in comparison to her last game with us. Like a lot of games, we used lines and vessels system. The topic of suicide was a hard limit for us. In one of our last sessions, a previous villain was resurrected by the big bad evil guy, and this drove Jill's character off the deep end. The big bad evil guy had just performed a fun, silly musical number, and almost immediately we were catapulted into Jill's character openly expressing suicidal ideation, with the DM outright having to roleplay her girlfriend talking her down from killing herself. To say the air was sucked out of the room would be an understatement. Almost everyone was extremely uncomfortable, one player even triggered to tears. It was the single worst experience I ever had playing D&D. After the session, we approached the DM about what Jill did, and he agreed it was completely uncalled for. He messaged Jill about how she violated our group's rules. Her response was to blame our DM and tell him that his story sucked. Then she wrote our group a hasty goodbye note with one last backhanded insult at the DM's poor sister for good measure. Just awful. The worst player was the one who infected nearly the entire group with COVID. Oh no! It was after the lockdowns ended, but the pandemic was still happening. We had been playing strictly online for about a year or so. When the lockdowns ended, we discussed and agreed to resume meeting in person, provided that if anyone felt sick or displayed any symptoms at all, that they would stay at home and play remotely over Zoom. Good idea. One session, the player in question brought a big crock pot full of meatballs to share with the group. They were delicious, and every player had at least one plate. Later that night, as we were on our way to our cars, literally all standing in an elevator together, the player mentioned that they almost didn't come because they were feeling a little sick. The silence that followed was deafening. The DM unceremoniously told him to not come back. I played with a guy who joined a long-running game with a long-running roster of players. All of us have been playing together for about 5 years. The new guy was a friend of the DM, so we thought he must be okay since the DM is a pretty good guy. For the first few sessions, the new guy was a, little strange, but hey, people have quirks. Until one session, we arrived at a settlement of Dragonborn. This is when he went full creep. He was playing a female elf and requested to find some Dragonborn who were looking for a good time, specifically Black Dragonborn. He then proceeded to tell everyone at the table how these Black Dragonborn ran a train on his character. The DM tried to course correct and forced a fade to black, only for the new guy to ask, "Does my character feel pregnante the next morning?" Fuck me, dude! Like, if you're a scaly, cool, whatever, no kink shaming, but not at the table with a bunch of other players who do not do ERP. Probably the player who kept getting the DM to implement secret homebrew rules and mechanics that directly empowered himself, and occasionally the girl he was mentoring, then threw a fit when the rest of us demanded more transparency. How dare you be open and honest? Forever DM here. There was a player in one of my campaigns who had never played before. She was quite well prepared. She read the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. She was also the worst, rules lawyer I had ever played with. I told the players, as I usually do, that I run games by fun, story, rules. Now, fun comes first because it's a game, and I'd much rather spend the game laughing with my friends than poring through a book to find the correct answer. She pulled all the fun out of every scenario. I was desperate to play, but couldn't get a group together, so I finally joined a group at the library. There, I met the biggest murder hobo ever. He was the party leader, which apparently meant he told everyone what they could do. He said I would come with the scouting party because I had decent stealth. He straight up told me no, he didn't want a sorcerer up front. He tried to tell me where to stand during fights. He didn't like that I was a folk hero and said a guild artisan would make more sense. Never mind that I had spent hours writing my character, of course. There was no opportunity for roleplay because the second the DM stopped talking, he was strategizing and generally just steamrolled everything, so we were all NPCs in his dungeon simulator. I suspect that being female had something to do with my treatment, but there was a lot of turnover. So I think he was generally abrasive. Whew! I guess I needed to get that off my chest. Now, the story does have a happy ending, though, so don't worry. Another girl joined after me, and eventually, we ran away together and formed our own group that was way more fun. Me. I look back and shudder to realize how many times I was the toxic element at the game table. Always trying to elevate the game now, though, by encouraging the fun rather than accomplishing my own ends like I used to. The worst players were in Adventure League. It was a couple playing a Tabaxi and a Goliath, and they were a little too affectionate. The Tabaxi player kept doing cat things like meowing and grooming. The Goliath was doing a daddy taking care of his kitten thing. It was uncomfortable. The worst DM is harder to pick, though, because I think most of my DMs have been pretty genuine. The worst one was telling his own story, which left very little room for character decisions outside of conversation. He also went too far into his Viking history influences and wanted all of our characters to hang themselves to death to get out of a situation, which no one was comfortable with. I'm glad I spoke up on that one. By the way, a detail that this DM kept doing, he loved doing the shoulder brush after we hit an enemy with an attack to show how badass the enemy was. He would do it multiple times in a fight, every time we thought we did something cool. The worst player. I used to run intro games for randoms on behalf of a local comic store. I once had a guy threaten to kill my family after throwing his dice across the table because, get this, I told him he couldn't climb into bed with another character. Why? Because they were unconscious and couldn't consent. This was literally his first D&D experience, and he chose to attempt sexual assault. Apparently, I ruined his fun. I canceled the game and went home. It stopped me from playing D&D for about 6 months. Hopefully you reported the guy too, and hopefully they're arrested by now, because that's disgusting. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and let us know in the comments below who was the worst person you ever played D&D with. And, of course, if you want to help keep the lights on and the sun on shining, make sure to join our membership program and get early access to videos, maybe a bit more later. We love you all. See you next time. Toodaloo for now.